Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jake Matthews, the online editor of HR Grapevine, and today I'm with Gary from Cornerstone On Demand. Today, we will examine why it's so crucial for all organisations to transform their succession process from something that happens once a year, or not at all, to an ongoing, dynamic practice that embraces the entire workforce. I'll be monitoring questions throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end. Over to you, Gary.
Hi everybody, just a quick introduction to myself. I love technology. I think it's magic. I love developing people and building teams. I get a great sense of achievement from doing cool stuff with other people. And I love to challenge the norm and do something a little bit innovative. So that's kind of my passion, my motivation. In terms of my experience, prior to working for Cornerstone, I worked for 10 years in financial services. Kind of organizations ranging from 220 to 120,000 people. I originally got my foot in the door through L&D, so my passion for developing people, but as I love technology, I kind of always ended up owning that aspect. So in terms of succession, typically I was helping design the process. Occasionally I was part of the program as an employee, and pretty much all the time it was my job to automate aspects of that. So it's something I've really enjoyed. I've learned a hell of a lot from. And when I joined Cornerstone, my role has been to really take that passion and that experience and that knowledge and help our increasing customer base kind of get the same business value out of it. So for today, what we wanted to kind of cover was exactly what was kind of outlined there. There's a big trend at the moment to kind of focus on the performance process and how that needs to change from being an annual process. And for me, that was conversations that were being had 17 years ago when I entered the kind of HR space. And I completely agree with it. You know, you should be talking about that stuff all the time. But I genuinely believe that people should be as or more focused on their succession process, because that is, in the main part, very annual. But if done in a certain way, this should be looking at your entire organization and adding a great deal of value. And because of the role that technology and data has to play, the opportunity for us to do more with it is much greater. So really what I'm trying to do personally today is urge everybody to make encouraging movement of people in your organization more of an obsession. Do it more often, do it deeper, do it more of the time. So it's going to be a fairly short and punchy session, full of ideas, questions, stories, and I guess my hope is just one of them might provoke a thought that you take away and kind of challenge yourself or your organization to see if there's anything you could explore to do things differently. So just kind of wanted to set the tone for, I guess, how I see, or from what I've seen, why most people are doing succession as of today. So mainly it's a lot driven by cost. So it's the cost of hiring external people. It's the cost of the loss of productivity when you've got to hire new ones. So a really important business driver, probably the most easiest to evidence and have a business case around. Probably the most mature in terms of process, but all about trying to mitigate something bad happening. So trying to manage that risk so it never becomes an issue, and ultimately it's kind of about retention, which in my early days in HR, a lot of people told me HR's job is retention. That's the one thing that it's there for. And for a long time I kind of agreed with that and understood it, and it kind of became my mantra. But after kind of piloting quite a lot of new stuff with succession, I actually found that it wasn't as expansive as I realized it could be. We have a lot of people going through kind of a market culture change. So this is financial service organizations, service providers, retailers, all realizing that technology, the way consumers want to interact, their products need to have changed, already have changed, and then needing to shift, bend, break their organization into a different place to do something new. Typically that's very much about values and behaviors. So they're either trying to be proactive or they're reacting to what's already happened. And they're going from a place that they know very well to something that's very new, not quantified, a little bit like a Rubik's Cube. There's lots of different ways to get there. No one's quite sure that the best combination to get there really quickly. Then we have engagement, which typically comes from exit interview forms. It comes from employee surveys. comes from performance review feedback, a lot of anecdotal stuff, and this is where organizations are typically calling succession talent, because it's very much focused on engaging with people and challenging them and getting the best out of them. So making the use of their skills, enhancing their skills, developing new ones. So it's a slightly different tone. Again, still really trying to retain them and make best use of them. And then legislation is a big driver for that. So it's something that a lot of organizations, industries have mandated to them. I don't think many people disagree with the principle of the richness that diversity brings. But again, it's very much kind of a principle that it will bring richness, and that's a good thing. What I'll try and do today is kind of drill into pragmatically where you really need to focus that and where you really need to try and take advantage of it. So this is in the main what we see people doing. There's of course it's not an exhaustive list. Nothing broken here. It's not that it's not adding value. For us, it's just a case of we feel there's more that can be done. So I don't want to kick against any of this on screen, but I do want to advocate for maybe adding some contrast, adding a bit of flavor to some extra value that could be out there. While we were putting this together and while I was talking to a few of my colleagues, sometimes the words you can kind of slightly different understanding. So by dynamic, we really just mean kind of constant change happening all the time. So we would probably say that all of us have constant change in our organization, probably constant activity. A lot of us might say that it's probably with a tone of fatigue trying to keep up with that. But I think most of us are trying to fulfill our aspiration of HR, of really being a partner to our organization and challenging the organization. And what 7 years of working as a software vendor has taught me about consultancy is that with your customer, the best place for you to be is to be able to challenge them, press them, and ask them questions that might make them feel uncomfortable but are new to them. And specifically internally, this is challenging your CEO. There's lots of industry surveys out there that will say that CEOs expect their business strategy to change regularly, or they're not happy with the role of their HR department. And for me, I've enjoyed going through an example of where we flicked that situation very quickly. I'm going to share a bit more of that, but it's really putting HR more in a place where we can say, why are we doing this? Why have we not considered doing that? Did you know this about your people? When we do this, this happens. And really focusing more on that than just kind of in an annual process, and really making it a normal part of the conversation that's had at all levels. I wanted to try and bring alive a few practical examples. So I appreciate the Man United football sporting logo might turn a few people off. So I'll talk generically about these two. So it's kind of a construction site and what was a highly successful sports team. The kind of characteristics that I like about those and what for me make them dynamic is that they have great clarity on what they're collectively trying to achieve. So everyone understands the goal and the purpose. So every time there's a decision to be made or a problem to be solved, it's a very collective decision. It's a very informed decision, and it's a very well executed one. They also don't have one philosophy around how they move their people around. They'll buy in if they need to buy in, if the moment requires that. They'll also develop. But what I really like, and specifically in a football context, is they can play people out of position, and it isn't to the detriment of performance. It might seem strange, but in the moment that might be the smartest decision of moving someone from one position to another, and the comfortableness that they have with that. It may be only temporary, but it's exceptionally effective, and to be able to do that and it not feel like a risk, you really need to breed a commonality and have a really good understanding of your people. And then they make a lot of tactical decisions. I've got a bugbear around people using the word strategic too much. For me, strategy is what you do before you go into battle. Tactics is what you do when you're in the battle. There was often very similar questions, but there's a lot of tactical decisions to be made throughout the year that have a very resounding impact on business performance. So because they know their people well, because they've created alignment, this actually makes being flexible a desire of the people that are involved rather than a frustration. And that's where I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the next few slides there. So apologies if anyone's a Man City fan or doesn't like football. This quote is what really flipped my head from thinking about just retention. It's a quote I think most people have heard before. When strategy meets culture, culture always wins. At my organization before Cornerstone, I heard the story. I wasn't in the room at the time, but I heard the story about how our relatively new CEO advocated this quote and how they challenged their team and asked a question around it. And for me now, I put it in every slide deck I do, and it perfectly sums up what our role is. Our role is to make sure our culture, we get the best out of it, and it becomes an asset rather than something that creates obstacles. So culture is what the organization values, what skills we have, what stories we have, what competencies we have, etc. It's kind of everything. It's your people. And the question they asked was, when our strategy meets our culture, what will happen? I think generally the CEO is a pretty good person, so would normally have asked this question anyway, but they're also relatively new. So they were opening themselves up to listening and hearing, but what it actually forced their team to do was start to describe typically what happens when you start to do something in your organization. So are we good at adopting stuff? What happens when we cascade changes? What kind of appetite do we have for challenging process and the status quo? So this set a lovely tone. There's obviously a lot more discussion, a lot more simulation, a lot more questions to follow, but it was something new that was being done in the organization. And at HR, we took it as a massive opportunity to get in there. It was a very people-focused question. And everything that we heard out of the back of those conversations, we literally sprinted away and started to say, this is our opportunity to do something quite cool. What can we get together? What do we want to do? How do we want to approach some of what we've heard? And how do we want to challenge our business areas and make sure that the strategy we're defining gets well executed? So when we ask this question next year, we know exactly how it's going to meet our culture, exactly where it's going to be embraced and exceeded, exactly where it's going to be a little bit sticky. And ultimately, we're collectively thinking about how we can utilize the best of our people to make sure that it's a positive answer to this question. So just talking about business strategy, this is another reason why we think having an annual process is not necessarily the best idea, because business strategy is changing all the time. We're actually all doing something different, and it's changing all the time. So just in the nature of that, it's kind of strange that a lot of our processes are annual and they look the same from one year to the next. We hear a lot of people who kind of really don't like the 9-box grid or really do love it. They either hate it because everyone else has done it, or they love it because it's really worked for them. And for me, we kind of try and redirect them to, it's just a tool. It's not about whether you like it or whether it's popular, it's about whether it works. And really what you need to do is look at exactly what your business strategy is, how that's applying to your culture, and come up with something that in a moment in time is exactly what you need to be focusing on. So it's a little bit like game theory. In the moment of the game, lots of decisions are made, and anticipating those decisions, simulating and role-playing and knowing exactly what's going to happen, gathering as much intel as you can, so when that moment comes, everybody knows what they're doing and you're well prepared to address them. So the one that I was going to focus a little bit more on is the acquire. We were in a fairly static industry in the financial services sector. We were looking for growth. We were looking to diversify. As part of that, we had acquired a smaller competitor. And one of the business decisions was, our strategy for this year is to absorb them into our business, take their book of accounts, ultimately get it settled, and then grow it. So we were very fortunate that we were engaged in a conversation on, okay, what does the acquisition look like? How are we practically going to do it? And it's fairly obvious, and we expected to do the conversations around, okay, who has the aspiration and the capability that they'd want to be traveling and be off-site and lead this? Who are our culture ambassadors who will help win over the hearts and minds of all the people that are there? And we were very focused on what was in front of our eyes. We have to absorb these new people. We want them to share our identity. We want to welcome them. We want the change to go well. What we additionally did, and what we scrambled to do, and what we learned a lot from, is we thought, what else? What else is going to happen as a result of that? And by taking all your really good people out of your business and focusing on this very high priority project, transition, change program, whatever you want to call it, we were leaving a bit of a void in our business. So we were taking all the good people, and we couldn't just hire them back. So we, as part of our succession process that year, the key metric that we added in that gave us the most value is we started to look at something very specific like spans of control. We wanted to know what was going to be the impact on the areas where we were taking people out and not directly replacing them. So we started to look at all the current kind of management, leadership, first line team leaders, subject matter experts, and understand what their spans of control were, which then allowed us to have an informed decision on who we were going to develop, who we were going to ask to cover more, whether we should be doing things like continuous improvement projects. And we also started to put our data next to business information. So we could look at headcount reports and business quality reports, so overtime, rework, complaints, all that kind of stuff. And we put together our retention reports and headcount reports with not just bums on seats, but what's the quality of the bums on seats. So we know that when we've got X amount of people, we absorb so much overtime, rework, attrition, complaints, etc. So we were, again, at high level, you kind of expect that, but the detail we're able to get to is we knew exactly where our tolerance was. We knew exactly which people we could ask to do that, and we engaged them quickly and set them up for success. We developed people, but we also moved people around the organization. This is data that we didn't just share in the departments that were losing people. We shared it around all departments and said, you know, have you got knowledge of this area, and you've got good leaders who can absorb volume and move them across and reutilize them in that way. So that was the first time we did it, and we kind of realized at that point, yeah, we really need to collect data that's relevant for what we're going to do this year. So probably what we do in our succession process should change all the time. And just doing it annual was kind of accepted, but we started gathering data in different ways throughout the year to complement what we was gathering as part of our core process. Something else that we learned as part of that was that we discovered a great deal of talents that present themselves as future opportunities. So we had people that we didn't realize had an accounting degree or had a background in something that we're completely unaware of. This has happened in the current role as well last year. So we had someone who was very creative, always trying to do something visual. They had a real thirst to apply that every day. And because of our roles, we were kind of the only opportunity within role was to kind of jazz up PowerPoints, present the odd session. And having looked at kind of what our business priorities were around growth, we had a very aggressive sustained growth target, which we thought would be harder last year than it would in any others. We thought, okay, we could just keep them in role, but we're looking to move people around. This is going to be harder this year. Therefore, we need to do something different. So we put this person in place and gave them that objective. We want to help grow. You need to positively influence, help our brand resonate, ultimately attract new customers. But we're giving you something that's for our current customer base. And it ended phenomenally well. When you leveraging those skills in the right way, when it's aligned to what the business wants, when the person's feeling challenged, then often the outcome can be pretty incredible. The other one that we kind of learned after year 2 is that we had a phenomenal understanding of our people. And we had a whole load of data, and it was intriguing to us. We'd never had all this before. We'd never asked the questions. We'd never been involved in discussions as a HR team where we were using it in that way before. So we were desperately trying to take best advantage of it as we could. But at some point we realized that we could get more buy-in from our teams, our business, and we could also get more value from the data if we actually kind of open sourced it, we offered it out. What businesses and leaders are very used to is coming and saying, you know, I need extra headcount, or we've got this problem, you know, we've got a decision to make. They're not really good at asking for help, and they're also having silos and kind of bunkered knowledge is a big problem. So what we wanted to show them is all of the people information that we had across the organization where we had a surplus of a capability, a competency, or a certain skill, or an appetite to do more, and a skill set that could be used in different environments. On the back of that, we created all kinds of programs that facilitated networking, sharing skills, mentoring programs, but it was all in alignment with we need to innovate onto new products, and we're acquiring. So, you know, one business area might be very busy with the acquisition, but there's other business departments that are a customer or an input to those business areas that are going to be impacted because the performance is going to change. So the scariest thing, but one of the most impactful things, was sharing this data with the managers and leaders in the business so that they know their own teams very well, but when you show them what their organization looks like, they start to understand the opportunities that are in front of them and kind of positively start to ask for help, and that help gets very specific. and naturally huge value to them if they can unlock some of their biggest problems by leveraging the talents that exist in the organization and not having to go externally or wait for them or develop them, which could take longer. So just to wrap up some of the kind of tacit learning points from a lot of that before we try and show you a little bit of it. In terms of keeping it simple, something that works phenomenally well is gathering data from the source. A lot of succession processes have a massive emphasis on either the HR business partner or the manager. And really the best examples that I've been involved with and we've seen is where you're getting it from the source. So whether this is an integration with LinkedIn or your access to that, whether this is collecting it from your individuals as part of your recruitment process or performance process, or whether it's just kind of out there on their profile, whether it has to be from your managers, just take it from the source because that kind of speeds you up. It's probably a better truth and it's ultimately the better outcome. It's the end game, so the quicker you work to that, the quicker you're going to get more value. The big issue with that is sometimes people don't understand why you're gathering it or what it's going to be used for. So around all of this, you do have to spend a good amount of time focusing on the clarity of what the business is doing, but what that then practically means, so that the why you're gathering data is very clear. As I said, a big part of offering our data out to our business managers was showing them that we're not trying to steal your people. We're trying to open this up in the common good, trying to collectively work and have us all have a broad perspective. There's very few people that can look at the whole organization, and those people normally don't have the time to do this. So as managers, you need to be doing it, and we're going to enable you to have that perspective. Obviously, them understanding the why is very key to that. In terms of making it faster, gather data all the time. It's a little bit like your performance process. There's data available to you all of the time, not just as part of an annual succession process, document, task, whatever you're doing. You can be gathering business metrics, headcount reporting, all of that stuff will go together. So try and gather it all the time because the aspiration should be trying to use it all the time. Don't obsess about having 100%. A lot of organizations do this. If it's not 100%, it's not a credible data set. You have to just start to use it appropriately. This is a change. Normally people are trying to do something differently. So, at worst, you can use it as an indicator. Maybe better, you kind of use it as an insight and you follow up on that and better interrogate it. If you do get all the data, great. You've got clarity on that. It'll help influence a lot of conversations. But being dynamic is about learning fast. Doing fast, learning fast, moving fast. In terms of making it smarter, this is much more about kind of listening and asking. So understand culture. A lot of people can easily describe it if asked what their culture is. A lot of HR teams are very skilled, and there's lots of tools and frameworks and theories and even consultancies out there that will do cultural inquiries. They'll do cultural mapping for you. But this is kind of, for me, what most people in HR are really in it for, understanding people and getting the best out of them. So taking more time out to think of it from this perspective is really key. And ask strategic and tactical questions. Again, there's a massive emphasis on, is that strategic enough? And a bit like a sports team, you have an overall strategy, you have an overall goal, but it's the moments in the game when there's a key critical situation that can sway whether you lose the game or whether you stay in it and you win it. So ask those questions all the time. It'll drive what data you want to gather, it'll drive discussions, but this one's really about opening up and listening rather than doing. And better is aligned to the strategy. It's very hard for anyone to kind of sum up exactly what the business strategy is, right down from what the CEO is asking for, right down to a low level. But that simplicity is massively valuable because the link should be that easy that you can describe it that simple. And then better is change what data you gather. If you're doing something different every year, or you've learned and you've changed, the data you're collecting shouldn't remain the same. You should be focusing on something a little bit different. And again, kind of asking those right questions, listening a lot, getting deep into your organization, and then presenting it back to ask challenging questions is the place that, from my experience, is really enjoyable and valuable to get into. At this point, I'm just going to kind of offer over to Jeremy, who's going to kind of show what this could look like in terms of the system side of things.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy Nabarro. I'm a Principal Solution Consultant at Cornerstone. I've worked for about 20 years in the HR and technology space, both working on tech-led transformations in the HR realm, but also for technology providers. What I'm going to do just for the next few minutes is take a quick look at how technology is helping organizations more dynamically manage their talent and succession processes. We're going to take a look at it from three perspectives. Firstly, we're going to look at it from an employee and how they can get more engaged in the process. We'll look at it as a line manager, and we'll also take a look from a kind of business or HR perspective. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. I've logged on as an employee in our organization. And one of the things that I think Gary alluded to is that, historically talent and succession management is something that's happened to employees rather than having them engaged in the process. And one of the things that technology is enabling organizations to do is to get more engaged employees and get them engaged in their development and their progression within the organization. So I've logged on as Marisa, who's a director within our organization. She's thinking about her career development. She maybe is thinking about how she wants to progress. Perhaps she's interested in working abroad in the future. So one of the things we're enabling organizations to do is to help employees maintain some of this talent-related information themselves. So rather than it being an HR-led activity, it's something where we can actually get the most current and the most up-to-date and relevant information from employees. So Marisa can go and look at her profile, very much along the lines of LinkedIn, so perhaps kind of LinkedIn for the enterprise. She can look at her role, information about her here. She can even put in a summary, record skills or interests or things of that nature. The idea here is that this is an opportunity for her as an employee to get engaged in the process and to think about how she can make herself attractive in terms of career development opportunities within the organization. So as well as her core profile, she can update information about her working background, her skills that she may have, accomplishments or experience she may have. And all of this is data that we can use in the talent management process because the more information we have, the more insight we can get into our workforce, understand where they come from, what skills they have, understand what their aspirations are. So here we can see information that's going to help us understand the capability of Marisa. But she can also directly get involved in saying, I'm interested in working abroad or in different work opportunities. So in this case, she's able to potentially go in and update career preferences to say that she's willing to relocate. She can put in countries or regions that she may be interested in, so maybe she's interested in working in Asia and Europe. And this is really a way, much like LinkedIn is a way to make ourselves more attractive to prospective employers or recruiters. This is a way for an employee to do much the same thing internally, to put their hand up and say, I'm interested in being developed, I'm interested in new opportunities. So Marisa can very easily go in and she can update her profile to really get engaged in that process. The benefits of this are obviously she's owning this aspect of her development. The data is going to be accurate and it's going to be correct. And as we said, it's a way for her to get engaged in the process. That's just a quick flavour of how it might be for an employee. Just going to flip over and we'll take a look at it now from more of a line manager perspective. So we're looking at the account of Curtis now. And within Cornerstone, there's a feature called the Snapshot, which is really like a dashboard or a snapshot view of an individual. So at this point, Curtis is looking at himself, but because he's a manager, he's able to very easily go and look at people within his team. So he can see that Marisa reports into Curtis. He can see the people who report into him. But in this case, he's just had a conversation with Carl, who is one of the people within his team. They talked a bit about development, etc. And one of the things that was concerning was that Carl's taken on some new responsibilities, so we need to reflect that. But there was potentially some concern that he might be looking elsewhere outside of the organisation. So in the snapshot here, I can see information about Carl's objectives, his development, performance. But I can go and, in a dynamic way, go and make updates to the key metrics and measures that we're capturing about an individual. So these are configurable metrics which you can define, and the idea really is that these reflect the kind of things you want to measure. So, back to what Gary was saying about the culture and the things which are important to your organisation. these metrics are, the kind of things which we want to measure about our workforce. So it may well be, obviously, the standard kind of things around performance and potential, but it could be whether somebody is potentially a cultural ambassador if we're looking to, foster and drive our culture throughout the organisation. I can make updates here. Potentially, maybe we're concerned about his retention risk, so I can make an update here. And as you can see, this is a really simple way, color-coded, configured and flexible to your organisation to enable managers to take ownership and accountability for this process. And rather than it being an annual activity that you do, once a year, or maybe you do it twice a year, this is something you can do in a dynamic fashion. You can come in whenever you need to and make updates, because we need to have our finger on the pulse of the organisation at any point in time. And this enables us to update that data as and when we need to. As well as updating those metrics, he can also potentially consider the succession for this particular position or person. So if he wants to see who the potential successors are for Carl, he can go in here and add successors or review the succession information for these individuals to indicate, whether they're ready now or not. So the idea with this is giving managers a simple tool they can use to dynamically update this information. They can do it in a timely fashion. So the other thing that we're going to touch upon, and the final thing for me really, is how can we use this data we've captured, both from our workforce, our employees, but also the data we see here from the manager perspective. And from a business or an HR perspective, how can we identify people and find people when we need to? So what we're going to take a look at is something called Cornerstone View, and it's really just a really powerful and dynamic people search tool. So I can go in and see different individuals here, a group of people, and what the tool provides you with is a really simple way to filter dynamically based upon the kind of information I'm looking for. So in this case, maybe we're looking to open a new office in Germany, so we can better service our customers there. So I'm interested in finding the right kind of people that we may want to take from our current UK-based operation and move them into that new activity. So what I can do here is start to filter this by information. So maybe I'm interested in thinking, well, first thing is I want to look at some attributes of these people. And this is all configurable to the kind of things you want to capture. But I've got the opportunity to determine maybe tenure, so I want someone who's been in the organisation for at least a few years, 5 years maybe in this case. And as you'll see, as I make decisions, the list of people I view starts to change. So as well as somebody being in the organisation for a while, we also want to think about language skills potentially. They're going to be in Germany. So somebody who potentially had some German language skills, which I can select there, would be useful. And that obviously narrows it down straight away. So quite clearly now we're looking at a smaller and more specific pool of talent. Maybe I also want to think about, I don't just want people who have got certain attributes. I want someone who's consistently performed well. So we can also take a look at performance metrics and some of the talent metrics we looked at. So maybe I want to make sure that we're looking at our solid or higher performers. And more importantly, and this kind of loops back to when Marissa was highlighting that she was interested in working and traveling abroad, we can specify and identify people who are willing to work internationally. So in this case, select yes. And now that narrows it down. We've got 2 people to look at based upon a number of different search criteria that we specified here. I can maybe look at, of these individuals, who's been marked as potentially having the greatest potential. It looks like Marissa is the right candidate in this case. So this is helping me as an HR or business user identify people to help solve particular business challenges. So I can see Marissa is willing to travel, she's a high potential, high performer, we know she speaks German, and she's been in the organisation long enough. And so this helps me to identify those people really quickly and easily. And then I can add them to a talent pool, I can add them to a list, and we can start to develop them or think about how we're going to progress them within the organisation. That's all from me. So I'm going to hand back over to Gary, and I think we're going to potentially take any questions.
Hello, Max, and thank you for that. Yes, we do have one question. This is from Fiona. She said, you spoke about changing the questions we should be asking. Have you got some examples of what type of questions we should be asking?
If this would be questions to your CEO, your leadership team, it's very much the kind of simulation questions. What will happen if? What will happen when? Put them in the situation where the decisions are going to be made and where information is going to be highly valued. What we found is, you're normally asking these questions to really experienced people, so they know the situation well. They know the causal effect of how people will feel and what they'll think. So then it is taking those types of questions, how will people feel if we do that, and making them important to answer. So they're not fluffy. It's, at the end of the day, again, if the culture doesn't respond well to what we're trying to do, we're going to struggle, we're not going to execute. So if that's going to happen, let's understand it and let's do something accordingly. So our spans of control was, we're going to take all our best people out of the department, they'll have profile, they'll get to work on this, which is quite exciting. The rest of us are just left with more work. Very natural reaction. So that's why we focused on it. If you're talking about in terms of their people, again, this is specific to what they're going to encounter. So we decided to ask all of our middle management and first line management the spans of control within their team, because that's the audience we wanted. And then we followed up with that to talk more about, okay, can we develop these people? Do we need to compensate these people? What do we need to do to increase motivation, keep a positive perspective? So it's all about those what-if scenarios and all about asking those people-focused questions and follow-up to really so you can almost describe what's going to happen. Once people have that vision, they can feel it, they can see it, they can touch it. It's actually really easy to come up with strategies to prepare for it.
Cool, thank you for that. We have another question. This time it's from Julie. She says, is there the ability to export the gathered information, for example, to Excel?
If you mean from the Sisto demo which was shown, absolutely, yes. The system's a great way to kind of gather information quickly and present it, but there's always massive value in being able to take it into Excel, just because every organization wants to do their own thing, but also because a lot of other data sits in that. So if you want to start to put it together, it's important to be able to do that. So absolutely, yes.
We have another question. This time it's from Adam. He said, the Cornerstone View looks interesting, and the ability to search by criteria. Is that a part of the succession module or an additional bolt-on?
View is it sits over the whole application, which we cover all of talent management. So it takes its information from many different sources. So obviously what you saw today was mainly profiling the succession stuff. So if you think of it as like an advanced reporting analytical tool, it therefore kind of is a component part of all of our parts of the system.
I have a question, and this one is coming from India. She said, we are in a not very matured succession planning. How effectively can this tool be used?
Interesting question. Would love to be able to ask some questions on that. If you don't have a mature process, I guess in one way the only way is up. Certainly in terms of Cornerstone, what we end up doing with a lot of our customers is in the early stages focusing on adoption. So just getting people to use it in a basic way, so not asking too much of them, keeping it quite forward and simple, and then over time ramping it up. So again, very much, when we're working with people who've been doing it 3, 4, 5 years, we expect them to be telling us that they're doing things very differently and they're changing it and they're mixing it up. But in the early days, absolutely, it's very much about adoption, getting it in there, getting a good feel for what data is going to inform an argument or a discussion at the executive level. To be really candid, some of the times we said we just need some stats that people don't know so we can prick people's ears up and continue to be part of that conversation. So very much about understanding your stakeholders and the people that would be part of that process. But change it over time. It's a complete maturity thing. You don't go from a standing start to something that's having a strategic input very quickly.
I've got another question. It's time from Julia regarding the demo we saw. She asks, is it a standalone system or is it integrated into an HR system?
So the Jeremy, you can join in at any time if you want, but I'm happy to take these.
Sure.
In terms of So we do the whole talent management. We do have a kind of core HR product, but we do have learning, recruitment, performance, succession, connect, compensation. So we're a bit like Google. One code base. You can have as many or as few of those parts as you want. But it's pretty normal for any company to potentially have a separate HR system where you keep on all the kind of core data and all the payroll. So if that's the situation, it's very easy and normal for us to be integrating rather than hosting that data. So either or, really.
I've got a question from a different Fiona this time, who has asked, would you suggest that we'll be able to bring in data from LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, one of the reasons why succession, when we go into a company, we're always interested, do you call it succession or talent? The word you use isn't the catalyst, but it's an indicator into what's their ethos. Typically those that are talking about talent might start to call the recruitment department the talent acquisition department. So they're starting to think about it, and there's a massive harmony between succession process and recruitment process. So as part of our recruitment, there's an obvious integration with LinkedIn, both in terms of getting kind of skills and stuff directly from resume, but also from seeing who they're connected with, so kind of social references. Naturally, it made sense to us to kind of incorporate that into the succession process, because again, at the end of the day, you're looking to put the best people in the right place. Whether you're a recruitment person doing that or a succession person doing that or anybody else, it's kind of the same information. So, you know, most obvious to try and reuse it. So, short answer, yes.
I've got another question from KO'd. This is regarding the software. They ask, is the software able to bolt onto existing ERP software?
I think that's the same question worded slightly differently to the previous one. So yes, just within EMEA we have over 400 customers, and we interface with a gazillion different ERP, HRIS, and also many other systems. So we're in the cloud, we're software, kind of anything's possible. We become very accustomed to interfacing with different systems a long time ago. So yes, most of our customers have one or several interfaces to ERPs, HRIS, event management systems, recruitment systems, learning websites, content hosting. So yes, a resounding yes on that one.
Cool. And it's the final question of today from Jenny. First of all, she says, great info today. In her company, she only has 150 staff. But she says this system would be great for an organisation at multiple sites of 1,000+ staff. However, do organisations her size get the same value add?
It's a good point. Yeah, it is different. The great thing about a system is used anywhere and kind of pull it together, and the more data you have, the more you're likely to learn from it. So probably with an organisation of around 100, your proximity to your people is going to give you a lot of that anyway. So you'd be looking for a different value. Sometimes an organisation of 100 wants to really profile something. It's maybe about employer brand and engagement. Maybe they're about to go through growth and they're setting themselves up for future. So I think you can still do the same things, but absolutely the value would be different. So that's what we talk about. You know, what's your reason for buying? What are your business problems? Where's your strategy? And how do you expect to do against that? And explore that a bit more. But we have organisations certainly down to that level that use our succession module for different things.
Cool. And that's all the questions we've had. So thank you, Gary, and thank you everyone that listened into the webinar. Just to note that a recording of this webinar will be sent out by Cornerstone in the coming days. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.